Welcome to a radical discussion of independence, free will, liberty, and the left-hand path. This is Daimonosophy 2.0 with your host, Paul Frederick.
No vision can grasp.
Well. Paul Frederick here, Daimonosophy 2.0. Hope everyone's doing well. So I saw Lords of Chaos, the movie, recently. Lords of Chaos, and this is the narrative film version of the book Lords of Chaos, which is about the Norwegian black metal scene, and specifically about the antics of the band Mayhem and Euronymous and of course Varg Vikernes and all of these guys. And I gotta say, it was an intense movie. I really enjoyed it. It was really heavy and really deep, and you really got into the feel of it. It really put you into it. And you know, all the actors had, and Euronymous is played by Rory McCulkin, the youngest brother from Cully McCulkin, the Home Alone guy. And they all just speak in regular Americanized accents. And so some people I know are disappointed by that. They want to hear them speaking in Norwegian or with Norwegian accents to give you the feel for that. But I like the fact that they were speaking in casual American accents, because it, for me being an American and a largely American audience, it gives you the feel of, that these are just kids and it's real casual. And I think it's important to understand that. A lot of that stuff was going on when I was younger. I remember it all happening in the early 90s when I first started hearing about the church burnings in Norway. When that first came out in the news, and no one knew who it was yet. I think there was a lot of suspicion that it was, black metal groups, satanic groups, certainly. And I remember some people saying, "Oh, cool. This is like, Satanism, satanic revolution," because there was, those types of people around at the time. And for myself, I remember initially being very concerned about it, because, thinking we were on the it felt like we were on the downside from the satanic panic, and that we had made strides as a movement, communicating to the world that we are, serious, respectable members of society, productive, creative individuals, law-abiding, very high standard of personal ethics, and all of those sorts of things. And remember hearing about the church burnings and thinking, "Oh man, this is not good. This is just going to stir up another wave of hysteria." And of course, you assume that it was, a bunch of, crazy teenagers. And of course, that's exactly what it turned out to be, is a bunch of crazy teenagers that were doing it. So it brought back a lot of memories for me from that time period. And I also remember somewhere, I think it was in Cleveland, Ohio, I was with Morphine Angel. This is several years later down the road, and we had done a show with the Electric Hellfire Club, and we were talking about it. And this is after it had come out in the news that, the identity of the killers. And I didn't remember any of their names or anything at the time. I'm like, it's just some idiots. And I remember talking about that. We were discussing, what all that means. I also remember 1994, 95 is when Morphine Angel toured in Australia. And we played a show in Brisbane. And we played with a metal band. And that band was Immortal. And they were just another band touring. They were a band touring from Australia. They were on the same bill as us. They're great guys. We hung out. I mean, we're all like kind of the same age, and we all had long black hair and wore black. And we had guitars and stuff, and so we related pretty well. And I remember rocking out to their music, and they were cool guys. And then they left, and I never thought about them again until many years later. I realized that they were one of the black metal bands that from that area and that scene. So I can't help but thinking about that when I'm watching this film, Lords of Chaos. Another thing that I really, really liked about this movie. And, this is going to happen all through this episode. I'm going to go back and forth. I'm going to talk about the movie, and then I'm going to start talking about my personal life and experiences. Because, I realized seeing the movie and afterwards that it's really hard for me to separate them. There's so many things in this movie that touch upon personal experiences that I had and the time period when I was younger and a little bit more rock and roll oriented, I guess you might say. And another thing I really liked about this movie is the way it portrayed Varg, because they did a really good job of portraying Varg Vikernes as being the poser, wanker, sociopath, person that he obviously is. And I thought they did a really good job. What's the guy's name? Ethan Cohen, I think, is the actor's name, who happens to be Jewish, and he's kind of heavy set too. He's not fat, but compared to Varg, who was like really skinny and everything, he looks kind of chunky. And you think that immediately when you see him, but then he plays the role like so well. I think that it just fits right into it, and it's just all just completely believable, and you feel like you're right there in the action with it. And so Varg is the other thing. It's just I had always been really annoyed by the people who idolize Varg, because the guy is just obviously no good at all. Even now, he's putting up his YouTube videos and talking about, the same old shit, like how Oystein, he was a poser and he deserved it, and he kicked me, and so it was in self-defense that I stabbed him, 36 times in the back and twice in the head or whatever it is. And it's like, you're just such an idiot. It doesn't even matter what you say. You stabbed your friend in the head. There's not an excuse for that. And the other thing that's messed up about this, and Gary and I used to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about Gary more in a minute, the first guitarist for Asmodeus X. But we used to talk about this. The irony with Varg is that, and really all these guys, and they point this out in the movie too. They illustrate it really well. They live in an idyllic, socialist kind of society where, they just have everything provided for them, and they just like threw it all away because of this. And I know someone's going to say, well, it's because they're bored. And I relate to that too, because I remember what it was like for me growing up in Nebraska in the Midwest of the United States, which is just a cold, flat land with like lots of snow and wind, and it's in the middle of nowhere, and you're completely not on the map if you want to do music, which I did. You know, I came out of Nebraska wanting to do gothic music, and you realize that everyone else in America, well, they won't even let you in the door. They think it's humorous just that you're from Nebraska. So it's a completely uphill battle. So you develop a real attitude, and you realize that no, you really have to fight tooth and claw to get on the map. And so I understand that. And you also have the fact that it's a boring kind of place, and nothing ever happens there. And so there is like this sort of anger and aggression and frustration that builds up there. And I know I saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of that as I was growing up there. I had many brushes with what could have turned into something really bad. But fortunately, it didn't. I consider myself so fortunate. And here's the irony for me. One of the reasons I didn't fall further down that path of chaos is because of Satanism, and then later Setianism, and ideas like that, which basically showed me that my exclusivity was an asset and not a bad thing. And by exercising my exclusivity, I could find a higher form of virtue and creativity out of that. And eventually the idea of exercising your exclusivity leads into the idea of exercising the gift of Set towards the act of dynamic self-transformation and becoming. And so here's the other irony there, is that these metal guys in Norway completely rejected the westernized form of Satanism. So, Varg always says, his thing is like, well, I wasn't a Satanist. I was a National Socialist, to set himself apart from that. But then Euronymous, there's a quote from some interview he did where they asked him what he thought about Crowley and Western Satanism. And he said, we reject all that, and we reject LaVey, and we don't believe in the law of do what thou wilt. We believe in they must do what we will. So, that says it all right there. It's just a really immature form of fascism and collectivism too, really. And none of the realizations or acknowledgments of the higher aspects of philosophy or the left-hand path, which again is all a great reason why the legitimate left-hand path did and has continued to divorce itself from it and make it really clear that kind of stuff is not what the left-hand path is about. It's not about rock and roll suicide, and it's not about taking over the world with black metal, and it's certainly not about Bard Ithun. He's another one of the killers out of this group, but Varg with his National Socialist kind of fantasies. But these guys all lived in this idyllic society, especially Varg. So he lived in this easy world where it's a welfare state, so he didn't have to work, and his parents were rich, and he could just put out albums, for the rest of his life. But no, he had to go like stab his friend in the head, and the other thing is, like, he got sentenced to murder for like I think 21 years, and he got out after 15 years in the incredibly liberalized penal system that they have over there. In America, he'd still be in prison, or he might have been facing the death penalty, even more likely. And I think he would be a good proponent for it. I mean, if you want to argue about the legitimacy of the death penalty, this would be a great situation to make a case where it would apply here. But not only did he get out after 15 years, while he was in prison, and there's a couple of videos. There's a documentary called Until the Light Takes Us, which has a lot of the interviews with him while he's in prison, and you can go see all these on YouTube. And you look at the prison, he's like, it looks like a fucking Hampton Inn or something. And it's like, no, well, no, that's the Norwegian prison. He's got some nice curtains there. And he recorded like 3 albums, I think, while he was in prison. He recorded albums when he was in prison. And some people think it's his best. This is another thing that really bothers me, is when people are like, Varg, I'm so torn because that was so lame that he like killed his friend and stabbed him in the head, but his music is like, I really love the music. And I'm like, no, his music isn't good either. Like that Dowdy Balders album that he did, it's the first album he did in prison where he did it all electronic, and people think it's so amazing. It's the same sequence over and over, and each song is like the same sequence, just repeated for like 10 minutes. It is not amazing. It is not good musicianship, okay? It's just an oddity. You know, you should listen to this for the same reason that you listen to, Charles Manson's music, I guess. But so not only is he, and then his prison sentence was like commuted to like 15 years. So and he tried to escape at one point too. You'll have to Wikipedia this. You look this up to see the details. But he actually escaped from prison and was found like gathering explosives to go on some other terrorist spree. And so they just put him back in prison. And after all of that, after stabbing his friend in the head, burning down churches, escaping and being involved in an explosive terrorist plot, he got out early after 15 years. And now he lives in France, and he got married, and he has 3 kids. And he published some books, and he puts up his YouTube videos where he, talks about, the old ways and Odin and shit. And it's just like, I don't know what it means. How does this happen? How does someone go through do all that stuff and then they just serve 15 years and they have a good time while there? They make him real comfortable while he's in jail there. They let him work on his albums, and now he's got a family. He's got kids, and Euronymous, he doesn't get to have kids. What about him? I mean, he was the one who was trying to organize things and help him get his album out and everything, and he doesn't get to have kids. He doesn't get to be married. What about him? So, I mean, Varg clearly is a sociopath, and the system that he lives in my opinion, is kind of sociopathic too. How else could a system like that allow someone to continue to exist like that? It's just, I don't know. It's embarrassing to see it happen. But getting back to the film, it certainly portrays Varg. It doesn't glorify Varg, and I was really glad about that. I was really glad. At least it does not glorify him, and it really portrays him in the kind of light, with the kind of personality that I think he most certainly has. And so I like that aspect of the film. The other thing that it made me think a lot about was, as I mentioned before, my friend Gary, who was Frank Faust in my band Asmodeus X, and he played guitar during the first few years when Asmodeus X kind of had a more metalish, we would be more industrial metal. And there's a couple of songs, if you go back and find the album Wolf Age, there's a couple of songs where you can really tell the black metal influence on it. And that's from Gary, absolutely, 100%. And the way I first met Gary was we'd moved into a new apartment, Takara So Apartments in the Montrose area in Houston, which are famous if you've been around in the scene here for a while. Lots of people have lived there. Bozo Porno Circus, the band, lived there, and a couple of other notables from the scene. Christian from the Hates also lived there for a long time. We were neighbors with him. When we first moved in, also Kelly Wilkins, who was who was also in Bozo Porno Circus, lived a few doors down from me. And Gary was friends with him, and so Gary would come over and hang out with him. And that's where I first met Gary, is at Kelly's place. And, you know, Kelly was definitely into LaVeyan Satanism, and so we would talk about those things. Gary was into LaVeyan Satanism, and, you know, I'd just spent all this time up north hanging out with the Electric Hellfire Club and gigging with them with my band Morphine Angel. And so he was like one of the people around in the scene who was familiar with the Hellfire Club. And so we talked about that. And he was also really into the black metal thing. And that book, Lords of Chaos, had, well, you know, I can't remember now if it had just come out or if it came out shortly after I started hanging out with Gary. But we'd read a lot of the same books. And, you know, there's a lot of people that I would meet in the scene back then who would, like, we'd talk about books a little bit, and they'd start saying, yeah, I like this book or that book. And then I'd realize really quick that they hadn't actually read a lot of books. And there was a lot of people who would pretend. And I'm sure it's still like this anywhere you go in any kind of like scene like that. There's always a lot of people who just kind of who pretend like they've read certain things, and they just learn the buzzwords for it and just kind of follow along with it. And you can always tell right away. These people aren't aware of it, but it's always really obvious when you're lying about if you've read this or that book when the person you're talking to has read the book. But Gary was like one of the first people I met in the scene who was totally genuine. And he was really, really fucking smart. And we were just on the same level with so many things. And his whole story was, you know, he'd come from a rough background with, like, you know, skinheads and drugs and you know, his own descent into chaos himself. And he had lifted himself out of that. He got straight. He went to school and got a technical degree in video editing. And he had a job at Fox Sports doing video editing. And you know, he was, you know, doing well, and he had a black metal band that he was trying to get going, and was having trouble, you know, with like band members and stuff like that. And I was trying to get Asmodeus X going, and I kind of didn't have anyone at the time either. I was just kind of like trying to get things going on my own and doing some programming and stuff like that. And so we started, I was like, hey, you want to get together and try and do something with some of the stuff I'm working with? You know, he'd start coming over to my apartment, and we'd have a beer, and we'd talk about, you know, left-hand path philosophy and, you know, world history, all these sorts of things. And also the black metal scene. He was into all of that stuff, and so he was telling me about that, and he'd play me the music. You know, this is where certainly I first heard, like, you know, Mayhem and Dark Funeral and the Immortal, and started jamming to all of these things. And, you know, so then I started playing him like some of the beats that I was working with for Asmodeus X, and I was like, well, maybe you could play guitar on that. And that's where our whole friendship grew out of, and our creative partnership that went on for several years. And so here's the point I want to make about this, the interesting thing about this, and it has to do with chaos. It's so appropriate that they called this book The Lords of Chaos and the movie The Lords of Chaos, because of the chaos within it. And it's a lesson in chaos, because the whole narrative about Euronymous and Varg is a story about where chaos leads. Like, if chaos is simply allowed to just grow it tells you where it leads. It leads into total destruction of everything. It's a destruction of the soul, destruction of like, the body, destruction of individuality, and the destruction of freedom. And so Gary was like really into these things. There was a certain point in the band, and I'm always going back and trying to figure out when this was. And at this point in time, I feel it had to do with when we toured the West Coast, and we hung out with this Michael St. Thomas guy from Michael St. Thomas Records, which people in the goth scene from back then would probably remember his name. He promoted a couple bands that were around at the time. Babylonian Tiles was one of them, and two things happened from. And this guy was a snake. I'll say now he was like this guy was a total snake, and I don't know where he is. He's not around anymore. He's not doing anything. He's probably hiding out somewhere, or if he's even still alive. But at the time, I was like really desperate to like try and get a record deal. So that's another thing about the Lords of Chaos movie, is it shows you how desperate people are to get their music out, that they will make deals with evil. Even when, some part of it tells you that, this person is evil, but you think that you're smart enough, that you're clever enough, that you can accept a little bit of this evil, and then you'll like be able to get something out of it for yourself, and then you'll win in the end and not be taken down with the evil. But what I didn't realize then is that when you compromise with evil, evil wins. And so somewhere from this whole California tour, two things happen. One thing is Michael St. Thomas started giving Gary pills, opioids, like Valium. And, Gary had a drug addiction thing in the past, which I didn't know him then. So I didn't know, I wasn't, it didn't create the red alerts for me that it should have. And then the other thing that happened was when we were driving back home to Houston from that tour in West Texas, somewhere in the middle of West Texas, the driver of the vehicle swerved in the middle of the night to try and avoid hitting a deer, and we wrecked. And it was a horrible wreck. This truck overturned like 3 or 4 times, totally totaled the truck, and just somehow miraculously, just totally miraculously, none of us were hurt. There's like 5 of us at the time, four in the band and 1 crew guy, and no one was hurt from it. But it was a shock, to be sure. I remember talking with Gary afterwards about it, and we'd say, "Hey man, you ever wonder if maybe during that wreck, maybe we actually died, but we just aren't aware of it yet." Ooh. I still think that sometimes. But it was a huge shock, and really nothing was ever the same after that. When we got back to Houston, and we started working on new material, and that song, there's a song called "The Tiger," which came out on it's on the album Wolf Age, and then we did a reiteration of it on the Bright Ones, and we continued to work on music, and we did more gigs. And then what was happening though is like Gary had developed a major like opioid problem from there on out, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And he got more and more into all of this music. Like it wasn't just like the self-destructive like black metal stuff, but he's also into G.G. Allin and all these other icons of self-destructiveness. And we would have philosophical discussions about this, and you'll hear me say this today too, that you are what you eat. And as Gurdjieff said, impressions are food. So if you fill yourself with impressions that are all about chaos and self-destruction, it's going to lead you in the direction of chaos and self-destruction. And that's what happened with Gary. So like within like 3 years of like coming back from California, he was dead, overdosed on drugs. I mean, it just progressively got worse, and he got into Oxycontin and all these other things, and then he was dead. And so this is always the other thing I think about when I'm watching this Lords of Chaos movie all the way through this movie. I'm thinking of Gary. I'm thinking of the good times when we hung out and we're young and we're like, we're jamming out to music and we're like, yeah, we're going to be rock stars one day. And then I'm thinking of the end when after he's dead and gone, he's consumed. He was consumed by it all. He was consumed by the chaos. He couldn't break out of it no matter what. And it's really painful to watch someone go through that. So that's the other thing about the Lords of Chaos, and is the lesson of it for me, that you have to be conscious and conscientious about the influences that you bring into yourself. And I go back and listen to black metal music, and you know what I love? I love a lot of that stuff. My God, some of that mayhem stuff is just so deep. And Ulver, and Immortal, and all these bands, I always love them. But when I listen to them, I'll go through a phase every once in a while. And this is what I did after I saw that movie. I went through a rekindling with all the old black metal stuff, and went and got some new albums. See where they are today. Yeah, they're all cleaning up their acts, and they're all getting mature. And I'll jam out to this stuff for a little while, but then after that, I'm like, I get my fill of it. I sense the chaos, right? I get my fill of the chaos, and I remember, oh yeah, this doesn't lead anywhere. This doesn't go anywhere. And then I've had enough, and I'm gonna go listen to something else for a while. And the other thing I think of when I'm watching it is, this is based on a book written by Michael Moynihan, who is someone that I know personally and I have met personally before. And actually, his wife played violin on the Verdandi Neofolk project that I did with Alice Karlsdottir. So, it's like that 6 degrees of separation thing. I'm watching this movie and I'm like, this is based on that book he wrote, right? And sure enough, they had his name at the end. So I was happy about that. I'm happy that he is involved with something of this scope. So that's like great for him. So I was really happy about that. So that's it. Those are my thoughts on Lords of Chaos. Go see the movie. It's fucking cool. Rory McCulkin does a great job. Great direction. I would have liked it if they had a little bit more actual black metal in it. That's my only actual complaint, I think, about the movie. I was just seeing it at they're jamming out at a party, and I think they're playing Dio. And I'm sure they listen to that stuff, but I wanted to hear some more metal. I think they should have played some Venom. I wish there was more Venom. I don't know. Maybe there was some in there and I just didn't hear it. But anyhow, it's a totally good movie. Go check it out. You will not be disappointed. And that's it for today, my friends. Please go check me out. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Patreon. Subscribe to the podcast. Go subscribe to us on YouTube. And always remember to keep the dark fires burning.